that's going to be starting out in compound archery, one of the first things you're going to have to look at is the style of release aid you're going to choose. Now, to kind of break down why you need a release aid, essentially when you're shooting a recurve bow with your fingers, what will happen is that when you let go of the arrow or let go of the string will actually leave your fingers to the side like that. It will kind of slip out. And if you slow down the string, the flight of the string, it's going to travel in a motion like that. When you're shooting a compound, you don't have this kind of wide limb for the string to settle into. You've got a thin cam track. So when you let go of your arrow on a compound, if you're shooting with your fingers, it'll give it a bit more of that kind of recurve oscillation when it lets go. Now, it doesn't mean you can't shoot barebow compound. A lot of people do, but the thing you've got to be aware of is that if you're shooting a compound with fingers, shoot something that's longer axle to axle actually designed to be shot that way. Because one, you're going to have the issue of the string leaving your hand that way and creating more variation. The arrow flight of your release isn't perfect. The second thing you can run into troubles with is derailing. If you've got a lot of pressure on the string and you're torquing it as you pull it back, you can pull it off the cam. This is why 95%, 99% of people are going to end up using a release aid with their compound. So definitely something that we recommend. Hundreds, thousands of different styles. The one thing I will say on a release aid is there are a whole bunch of cheap ones out there. I would recommend putting aside at least $100 to spend on a release aid. Now this is an Australian video, so we're talking in Australian dollars. So $100 will get you a basic release aid to get started. Why would you avoid the cheaper ones? Well, for one, the quality control. So if you buy a $40 release aid online and you're trying to pull back a 70-pound bow and you get to here and the release fails, you're going to have all the pressure and all that energy you've put into drawing the bow back, let go, and this hand's going to come back and you're going to smack yourself in the nose or the jaw. So one, it's a safety thing. The extra 50 bucks is definitely worth the trip to the A&E. So worth avoiding the trip to the A&E. So I definitely spend at least 100 bucks to get yourself into a decent release aid. The other thing is just the adjustment. I mean, the cheaper releases won't have a lot of tension adjustment or length adjustment, so you're kind of stuck with what you've got. So we'll start off with the wrist strap style releases. So wrist strap being something that will strap around your wrist, like so, and you've got one post on the side to act as a trigger. This is what the majority of people will start with in compound archery. One, because from a hunting perspective, it's on your wrist, it's right there when you're walking around the bush, you can just grab it when you need it, it's not in your pocket, you can't lose it, it's right there. Two, is they're a lot cheaper. So again, you'll get one of these for about $100. If you move into a handheld release, you're looking at least $200 and up to get something half decent. So with a wrist strap, some of the pros, like I was saying before, is that it's there, ready for hunting. It's easy, it's pretty hard to lose. It's kind of easily accessible. Couple of the cons with it is when you pull back and you're coming into anchor, it's quite easy to kind of move around on your face. You don't get a really solid reference with it. Essentially, when we're shooting a wrist strap release, we want to try and lock that index knuckle kind of under our earlobe like that. But even still, there's a bit of play in that area. And although you've obviously got a peep sight to line up with, it still creates the chance for more variation. And on the target side of things, you're not going to see many people shooting a wrist strap style at your World Cup level or World Championship stuff. People will still do it, it's just nowhere near as common as one of these handheld style releases are. So in your wrist strap, you've got a couple of different options. The first one being a simple one like this. This is a Patriot Release. This is a very basic, non-adjustable kind of release. So you've just got your closed jaw hook, press to fire, push that back up to close. Very simple, basic release. Your next step up from that is your Patriot Flex. So that's the same style of mechanism, but you've actually got adjustment in the head. So you can make this head here longer or shorter, which is very important because if you pull the bow back, depending on the length of your fingers and where you're anchoring, if this is really right back here, it's quite hard to kind of get a good hook on it, or if it's too far forward, you're going to be really reaching for the trigger. So the Patriot Flex is a really good in the basic releases because you've got a little bit of adjustment and it's not going to be hundreds of dollars. Another good one is the Scott Quick Shot, same kind of price range as your Patriot Flex. Same thing, you've got that adjustment as well to move the head backwards or forwards. If we move up in the market into the kind of $200 wrist strap range, you've got your carded 2-shot. So what you're paying for at this stage is a length adjustment, better quality strap, and you've also got tension adjustment in the head as well. So with a release style like this, you've got a little grub screw that goes inside the trigger mechanism, and you can change how easy or how hard that is to fire, which is really good because if you're someone that's got a bit of anticipation or is pressing the trigger a bit too early, something like this, you can make it a bit harder to pull on and make it harder for you to do what's called punching, which is getting on the trigger and just firing the shot as soon as your pin hits the middle, rather than squeezing through the shot, as we've covered in other videos as well. So this is a good kind of higher end wrist strap style. Again, we've got a closed jaw. So as you press it, it will bring that jaw in and kind of closes around the loop like that. Another one we've got, which is really popular, is the Spot Hog Wise Guy. And you'll notice on this one, it's kind of got an open jaw design. So the benefit of something like that is that when you're shooting, especially in a hunting situation, instead of having to look down at your bow, clip it onto the loop, then look up at whatever you're shooting at, you can keep your eye focused on the target the whole time. So if you're looking at a target 20 meters away, you can keep your eyes on it, load it on your D-loop, pull back and make the shot without having to double check that you've actually got the hook around it. So that's the benefit of the open jaw design. The other features, particularly on the Spot Hog, is rather than just having kind of a fabric adjustment system to move the head forwards or backwards, you've got a metal system there that's actually got little ridges cut out, and you can kind of micro adjust the length and lock it in with a screw. So it's a much more solid design. So when you're looking at a wrist strap, you're looking for essentially the tension adjustment, a length adjustment of the head, and then if you want to go higher up into the more flagship releases, you're looking at kind of the way those systems operate, whether they're fabric, whether they're metal, open hook or closed hook design. Moving on to your handhelds. So like I said before, a handheld thumb button style release or a hinge release is much more popular along your high level target archers, World Cup shooters, World Championship shooters, and starting to be more so among the hunters as well. So your basic one would be something like a Tru-Ball Max Hunter 3. On this release here, it doesn't actually have a thumb post or a barrel. It's just got a little kind of L-shaped post that sticks out from the release that you use to trigger. That's a very basic starter thumb release. It's about as cheap as you're gonna get for something that's reliable. I would recommend spending the extra money and getting a thumb barrel because it's much easier to kind of hook your thumb around a barrel than it is to press against the post. And it's less likely for you to get that kind of anticipation feeling when you're around the barrel because it's harder for you to just kind of press the shot off and easier to make those kind of surprise squeeze shots. So that's your Max Hunter. Like I said with the wrist straps, you're looking to spend about $100 to get started. With a handheld release, I look to spend about $200, $250, and that's the same with a trigger or a hinge. So they're a little more expensive than your wrist straps, but the benefit with these is that when you come into anchor, you're holding it in your wrist and your hand like that with your knuckles flat. And these two knuckles that sit just above the head of the release, the bones in these fingers are gonna touch your jawbone under your face. And if you've got bone on bone, it's really hard for that position to move. So your anchor with a handheld release is much, much more solid than with a wrist strap. So that's where your consistency comes with these. With your thumb buttons, we stay on the hunting side. You've got your Scott Pursuit and your Spot Hog Friday Night. These are two pretty popular releases. The benefit of the Pursuit is that it comes with a 3-finger and a 4-finger adjustment. So the little hook on the end of the release, you can actually unscrew that and change it from a 3-finger release to a 4-finger release. Really good for people starting off in the handheld releases if you're not 100% sure which one you're gonna prefer. So having a lot of kind of adjustment and variation is really good. It also has a lanyard as well, just like the wrist strap style releases do. So if you're hunting, it's there, it's really hard to lose and easily accessible. That one has one of the closed jaw designs. The Spot Hog has an open jaw design. So similar to the Spot Hog Wise Guy, again, the same theory being that if you're hunting, keep your eyes on what you're shooting at, slide your release on, pull back, without having to stop, look, open and close the jaw. And that's something that might just become subconscious anyway. If you shoot enough arrows, you kind of know where your loop is, you know the button to press, you've done it thousands of times, that it's a personal preference thing between the open and closed jaw design. Some people like the ability with the closed jaw, they can clip their release on and actually leave it hanging off the D-loop because it will stay on the bow because the jaw is shut. So it's more personal preference, I feel, between the open jaw and the closed jaw. I definitely wouldn't say, oh, you have to use open for hunting or you have to use closed for target. It'll be personal preference and how comfortable you are with your release. Then you get into your higher end target releases. This is a stand shoot off. So this is when we're getting into the $400 range of target release aids. Again, bright colors, not really designed for hunting, and you don't have any lanyard or anything like that. So it'd be quite easy to drop it if you're out in the bush. So this would be something more designed for target. So the features in this, as opposed to a hunting release like the pursuit or the spot hog, it's going to be finer adjustment. So it's much easier to adjust the tension on this. You've got a much, I guess, finer range of tension adjustments. And you can also get 3-finger, 4-finger, medium, large, different colors, a whole lot of different stuff. Whereas the hunting releases are generally just your kind of one size, one color for each model. Last but not least, we've got your hinge releases. Some people will call these a back tension release, but they are essentially a hinge. So this one here is a Longhorn Hunter. Same kind of style as the pursuit with this lanyard here. And with a hinge, what you're gonna do is actually clip the loop onto this little hook here. And there's a half moon in the underside of that loop, that hook, so that when you rotate this release, you'll hear it click, and then it'll fire. So rotate. And you can adjust that whether or not you want the click. The click's definitely good when you're learning, and it doesn't mean you have to take it off as you progress, but definitely keep it on when you're first starting, because then you'll know when you pull back, it's kind of a warning. It's about to fire, and then you can pull through the rest of your shot. So that's really good to kind of get your head around the release, having that click in place. So you're not gonna get there and have that myth that people think with a back tension or a hinge release, you're gonna pull back and hit yourself in the face. You're not. As long as you keep the hinge in that same position, you've got to click on it to tell you when it's going to fire. You'll learn to adjust pretty quickly. And ultimately, if I keep the hinge in this position, it's not going to fire. It's only when I rotate. So as long as you're not rotating, it's fine. Benefit of the hinge is you're much less likely again to want to anticipate or punch the shot, because all you're doing is getting to full draw and pulling before it fires, rather than the trigger where you can actually press it to fire the shot. So the hinge is probably, I'd say, favored now among a lot of the top target archers. It's something that I use for target and for hunting, just because I can essentially not eliminate, but reduce that chance of getting anticipation or any target panic stuff when I'm lining up a shot. And again, you've got your hunting and you've got your target models. So this is the Longhorn Pro Micro. So same kind of family as a Longhorn Hunter. This one's in brass. So some of the target archers like a bit heavier release aid as well. So that's something to think about too down the track, is if you want a brass release or an aluminium release, something heavier or lighter. And again, you've got micro adjustment in this that you wouldn't have in the hunting style release, because this is more target focused, that's more hunting focused. So that'd be your difference in the hinges. Normally when people are coming in to buy their first release, purely for the budget conscious side, we normally start them off with a wrist strap. And then after they've shot for a couple of months, we like to kind of transition them down the track to a hinge or a handheld style release, because you will see a benefit in your accuracy from there. No reason why you couldn't start off straight away with a hinge, but for an enjoyment factor in the sport, when you're starting off with a compound, if you've never shot before, there's a lot to kind of wrap your head around. We find that in most cases, it's easier for people to just get started with a simple style of trigger, learn the bow, how to move your sight, your draw length, all that kind of stuff, and then introduce this stuff later on. There is one other category of releases, and that's tension releases. So you've got your stand element, a lot of kata releases like the Evolution series, and all your knock-on releases, where basically you pull back, there's a safety, which is like the thumb barrel on a trigger. You take your thumb off that barrel, you pull against the wall, and it will fire the bow. So it's essentially a spring inside the trigger, and you set the spring to the tension of the holding weight. And as you pull the bow, that spring will kind of change in shape to fire the shot. So you could set it to fire at 30 pounds of pressure. So when you get back to full draw, take your thumb off the safety, you're holding 20 pounds, you apply another 10 pounds of pressure, it'll fire. Really good training tool. They're not cheap. They're all gonna be north of 300 for something like that. And the problem with those is those springs after a while, again, depending on the quality of the release, tend to stretch and it can change the speed at which it fires. So I'd recommend this as a good training tool, but for something, for hunting or for target, I would recommend moving into like a hinge or a thumb trigger after you've shot the tension release, and to just use a tension release as kind of a training tool. So to summarize, you've got your wrist straps, you've got your thumb buttons, your hinges, and your tension releases. So there's 4 main families of release aids. Whatever you start with, the main thing you want to make sure is that you're executing the shot in a surprised manner, using your elbow and your shoulder to fire the shot, rather than thinking about pressing the shot when it's on the middle. There's lots of videos on YouTube. We've got a couple as well talking about release aid execution. That's the most important thing regardless of what style you're using. Again, don't cheap out on a release aid. Go at least $100 or more. Anything less than that is very unreliable, and I've seen lots of people have blood noses and lose teeth from release aids firing with 60, 70 pounds of pressure, an inch or 2 in front of their face. So definitely spend the extra money on a release aid. And ultimately just take the time to sit down and think, 1, what budget do you kind of have for the release? 2, what are you going to be using it for? And then 3, what are the features are you kind of after? Do you want the micro adjust? Do you just want something simple? And that will put you into a good category of release. And most shops, I know we certainly do, if we have the releases on the wall, you're absolutely welcome to take one out and give it a try as well. And that can kind of set you down the path of finding which you prefer. All the release aids we've spoken about today are available at elizaarchery.com.